I have spent 40 years studying economic policy, and I can tell you that Trump's tariff strategy represents the most catastrophic miscalculation in modern American trade history. Not because it was too aggressive, but because it achieved the exact opposite of what it promised. Instead of bringing manufacturing back, it accelerated our industrial decline. And the damage is so deep, so structural, that it will take decades to repair. Let me take you through what actually happened step by step, because the story you were told about trade wars bears almost no resemblance to the economic reality that unfolded. And understanding this reality is crucial, not just for making sense of the past, but for avoiding the same catastrophic mistakes in the future. In 2018, Trump launched what he called the largest trade war in economic history. The promise was simple: impose steep tariffs on imports, force foreign producers to absorb the costs, bring manufacturing jobs back to America, and make the country economically independent. It sounded like common sense. If foreign goods become more expensive, Americans will buy domestic alternatives. If domestic demand rises, factories will reopen, workers will be rehired, and communities will rebuild. But economics does not work like campaign slogans. And what actually happened was a textbook example of how good intentions combined with fundamental misunderstanding of how markets function can create disasters that ripple through an economy for years. The first crack appeared almost immediately, but it was hidden from public view. When Trump imposed 25% tariffs on steel imports in March 2018, the administration predicted that domestic steel production would surge, mills would reopen, and steel workers would return to jobs they had lost to foreign competition. That is not what happened. Instead, American companies that used steel as an input faced an immediate cost crisis. Automakers, appliance manufacturers, construction companies, and machinery producers saw their raw material costs spike overnight. They had three choices: absorb the higher costs and accept lower profits, pass the cost to consumers through higher prices, or find ways to reduce their steel consumption entirely. Most chose a combination of all three. They raised prices, squeezed profit margins, and began redesigning products to use less steel. But there was a fourth option that the tariff architects never anticipated. They started moving production overseas to countries where they could access steel at global prices rather than artificially inflated American prices. Within 18 months, the United States had lost more manufacturing jobs in steel-consuming industries than it had gained in steel-producing ones. The tariffs designed to protect American workers had actually accelerated the offshoring of American manufacturing. By 2020, we had fewer people employed in steel-related manufacturing than when the trade war began. But steel was just the beginning. The pattern repeated across every major tariff category. Aluminum tariffs drove aerospace and automotive companies to source more components from foreign suppliers. Washing machine tariffs led to a 12% price increase for consumers and prompted manufacturers to shift more production to Mexico and Canada. Solar panel tariffs decimated the domestic installation industry, costing more jobs than the entire American solar manufacturing sector employed. Each of these outcomes was predictable. Economists had warned about them in advance, but the political appeal of simple solutions overwhelmed the complexity of actual economics. And the consequences were borne not by the policymakers who made the decisions, but by the workers and communities who depended on the industries those decisions destroyed. The China tariffs tell an even more devastating story. Trump imposed duties on over $350 billion worth of Chinese imports, promising that Beijing would pay the price and American businesses would benefit. But tariffs are not paid by foreign governments. They are paid by the importers, which means they are paid by American companies and ultimately American consumers. The Peterson Institute for International Economics calculated that Trump's China tariffs cost the average American household $831 per year in higher prices. But the damage went far deeper than consumer costs. When you make it more expensive for American companies to access global supply chains, you do not strengthen domestic manufacturing. You weaken it by making American producers less competitive against foreign rivals who maintain access to those same supply chains. Here is what I mean by that. Imagine you are running a company that assembles electronics in Ohio. Your product competes globally against companies in South Korea, Germany, and Taiwan. If tariffs force you to pay 25% more for components that your foreign competitors still access at market prices, you have not become more competitive. You have become less competitive. Your choices are to accept lower profit margins, raise prices, and lose market share, or move production to a country where you can access those components without the artificial markup. Thousands of American companies faced exactly that choice between 2018 and 2021, and many of them chose to relocate. The very policy designed to bring manufacturing back to America accelerated its departure. And once those production lines are built elsewhere, they rarely come back. The capital investment, workforce training, and supply chain relationships represent sunk costs that make relocation economically irrational, even if tariffs are later removed. Meanwhile, the countries targeted by the tariffs adapted far faster than anyone in Washington anticipated. China did not collapse under trade pressure. Instead, it accelerated its efforts to reduce dependence on American markets. Within 3 years, China had signed major trade agreements with 15 Asian countries, expanded its Belt and Road infrastructure investments, and dramatically increased trade with Europe, Africa, and South America. The result was not Chinese submission to American demands, but Chinese diversification away from American influence. Today, China trades more with the European Union than with the United States. Its largest trading partner in many categories is no longer America, but Germany or South Korea or Vietnam. The trade war did not bring China to its knees. It taught China to build an economic system that was less vulnerable to American pressure. And that represents a fundamental shift in global economic power. For decades, access to the American market was the prize every developing economy sought. Countries would restructure their entire trading systems to maintain good relationships with Washington because American consumers represented the most lucrative market in the world. But when America weaponized that access through unpredictable tariffs and trade threats, other countries started building alternative networks. The European Union accelerated its trade relationships with Asia and Africa. Japan deepened its partnerships across the Pacific. Even traditional American allies began hedging their economic strategies, reducing their dependence on American markets in favor of more predictable partners. The message was clear. If access to America comes with the constant risk of political disruption, it is better to diversify elsewhere. But perhaps the most devastating consequence of the trade war was its impact on American agriculture. Farmers who had been among Trump's strongest supporters found themselves caught in a retaliatory crossfire they never anticipated. When the United States imposed tariffs on Chinese goods, China responded with tariffs on American soybeans, corn, wheat, and pork. The numbers tell a stark story. American soybean exports to China fell by more than 80% between 2017 and 2019. Corn exports dropped by 85%. Wheat exports were virtually eliminated. An entire generation of trade relationships built over decades evaporated in months. And unlike manufacturing supply chains, agricultural markets are especially difficult to rebuild because they depend on long-term contracts, infrastructure investments, and buyer relationships that take years to establish. The Trump administration tried to compensate farmers through direct subsidies, spending over $28 billion in what it called trade mitigation payments. But subsidies do not replace markets. They create dependency. And when China began sourcing soybeans from Brazil and Argentina, when it built new supply chains across South America and Eastern Europe, those relationships did not automatically revert when the trade war ended. Today, 5 years later, American agricultural exports to China remain below pre-trade war levels. The market share lost to Brazilian and Argentine producers has not been recovered. Entire farming communities that had spent generations building export businesses found themselves struggling to survive, not because their land was less productive or their methods less efficient, but because their government had started a trade war their crops could not win. The total economic damage is staggering. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York estimated that the trade war reduced American gross domestic product by $7.8 billion per month at its peak. The Tax Foundation calculated that tariffs destroyed 300,000 American jobs between 2018 and 2020. And a comprehensive analysis by the International Monetary Fund concluded that Trump's tariffs cost the American economy approximately $2 trillion in lost output over 4 years. But the true cost extends far beyond dollars and statistics. When policy failures of this magnitude occur, they erode trust in institutions, polarize political discourse, and make it harder to build consensus around any major economic initiative. Workers who were promised that trade wars would revive their communities instead watched those communities struggle with higher prices, lost jobs, and economic uncertainty. That broken trust does not heal quickly, and it makes the next set of economic challenges even harder to address because people have learned to distrust promises that sound too good to be true. What makes this failure so particularly tragic is that there were alternative approaches available. Instead of using tariffs as a blunt weapon, the United States could have invested in worker retraining, infrastructure modernization, and research and development programs that would have made American industries more competitive without making American consumers pay higher prices. We could have strengthened international alliances to create coordinated pressure on countries that violated trade rules. We could have used targeted sanctions rather than broad tariffs, focusing on specific practices rather than entire economies. We could have coupled any trade measures with massive domestic investment programs that would have created new opportunities for the workers and communities we claim to be protecting. But instead of patient strategic policymaking, we got economic theater. Instead of building American competitiveness, we handicapped it. Instead of strengthening our position in global markets, we taught our competitors to function without us. And instead of protecting American workers, we created conditions that accelerated the very trends we claim to be fighting. The lesson here is not that trade policy does not matter or that America should accept unfair practices from other countries. The lesson is that economic policy requires understanding how markets actually work, not how we wish they worked. It requires patience, precision, and a willingness to acknowledge trade-offs rather than promising solutions that sound simple but create complex problems. As we look ahead, the question is not whether America can still rebuild its industrial base and compete effectively in global markets. We absolutely can, but it will require the kind of long-term thinking, strategic investment, and institutional competence that the trade war utterly lacked. It will require leaders who understand that economic strength comes not from isolating America from the world, but from making America so competitive that the world wants to engage with us. The $2 trillion trade war disaster should serve as a permanent reminder that good intentions are not enough, that economic nationalism is not the same as economic strategy, and that in a globalized world, attempts to win by making everyone else lose usually end up making everyone lose, including. In today's digital world, cryptocurrency is no longer just a trend. For many people, it has become a real business opportunity that can be started with basic knowledge and an internet connection. The first step in treating crypto as a business is education. Understanding simple concepts like Bitcoin, Ethereum, wallets, exchanges, and how the market works is essential before putting in any money. Some people use trading to earn short-term profits, while others focus on long-term holding. And there are also options like staking and passive income where crypto can grow over time without constant buying and selling. What makes crypto attractive is flexibility. You can work from anywhere, control your own schedule, and start with a small amount if you are careful. However, crypto is not gambling. Successful people treat it seriously. They do proper research, manage risk wisely, and never invest money they cannot afford to lose. The market goes up and down, so patience and discipline matter more than chasing quick profits. When crypto is handled with planning and consistency, it can become a long-term income path instead of a risky shortcut. If you want more simple and practical videos about crypto and online income, make sure to subscribe to the channel and stay connected for upcoming content.